All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to explore some really powerful ideas from the writer Robert Bly, specifically from his work on what he calls the hunger for the king in a time with no father. We're about to unpack a huge psychological and cultural shift that honestly affects every single one of us.
Bisley kicks things off with this statement. It's so simple, but it hits hard, doesn't it? He's not just talking about a few isolated cases. He's suggesting this is a widespread feeling in our culture. This is the central problem we're going to dig into today. This nagging sense that something essential is missing.
So, where does this feeling even come from? In this first part, we're going to look at what Bly calls father hunger and figure out what this absence really means for us in the modern world. I mean, this metaphor of father water is just incredible. What Bly is saying is that the problem isn't necessarily that individual fathers are bad people. It's that the entire cultural wellspring of fatherhood itself has basically run dry. It's become really hard to access, not because of a personal failing, but because the whole water table is dropped. And you can see this in how our perception has changed. It's just stark. For centuries, the father was this figure of immense power, someone you had to challenge, to wrestle with, to overcome. And today, he's often the bumbling dad in a sitcom. You know, the guy rustling a newspaper, totally oblivious. This is just a minor change. It's a total collapse of his psychic importance. So, how on earth did this collapse happen? I mean, it didn't just happen overnight. Bly points to a very specific moment in history as the turning point, what he calls the Great Separation. This right here is the fundamental break. For pretty much all of human history, a son learned what it meant to be a man by watching his father work, whether it was hunting, farming, or crafting something with his hands. Then, boom, the Industrial Revolution comes along and moves the father out of the home, off the field, and into this abstract, invisible world of the factory and later the office. You can really see the progression clearly here. It's a journey from a constant physical presence, teaching side by side, to a near total absence during the day. A son no longer gets what Bly calls a body on education in what it means to be a man. All he gets is his father's mood at the end of a long, stressful day, usually tired, remote, and kind of distant. Now, this separation isn't just some interesting history lesson, it has had profound, and I mean profound, psychological consequences for sons, creating what Bly vividly describes as a hole in the psyche. So, when a son can't see what his father does, when he can't see him contributing in a tangible way, he doesn't imagine him as a hero. Instead, Bly argues that empty space gets filled with suspicion. And this creates a really deep seated distrust of not just his father, but of all older men. You can see how this makes genuine mentorship and guidance almost impossible. That natural bridge between generations just crumbles. This distrust leads to a really fascinating psychological coping mechanism. To deal with a father who seems weak or absent or just less than, the son doesn't fight him. Instead, he tries to fly above him. He becomes a super high achiever, professionally or spiritually, in this subconscious attempt to redeem his father's legacy. But he's flying away from the problem, not actually solving it. And this right here brings us to the absolute core of Bly's entire argument. He suggests that this personal father hunger that we feel is really just a surface symptom of a much deeper, more ancient, and archetypal longing that we all share. This is the big twist. The longing isn't just for our own personal dad, it transforms. It becomes a hunger for the king. And by that, he means a mythological archetype. This is the part of us that represents order, blessing, creativity, and a sense of purpose. It's that sacred, life-giving principle of the masculine that he believes we've lost. Bly breaks this archetype down into three distinct realms, which actually makes it a lot easier to understand. First up in the mythological world, you have the sacred king. Think of this as the ultimate source of order. Then you had the political king here on Earth, who is supposed to be a physical bridge to that sacred energy. And finally, there's the inner king, which exists inside each of us. It's our personal connection to our own purpose and passion. And here is the crucial link. When our cultures got rid of monarchies, when we got rid of those visible political kings, we accidentally cut a wire in our collective imagination. It made it way harder for us to connect with that bigger idea of the sacred king. And when that mythological connection is broken, Well, our personal fathers can't help but seem smaller, you know? They're cut off from that ancient source of radiance and authority. So, what do we do? With the outer kings gone and the sacred one feeling so distant, how do we find our inner king? Well, Bly suggests the work is deeply personal, and it starts by turning around and looking squarely at our own father. This is the essential psychological task we all have to face. We have to recognize that two different streams flow from every father. One is sacred and full of blessing, but the other can be poisoned and wounding. This is what Bly calls the axe father. We can't ever find our own wholeness until we confront and make space for both of these sides. Now, this process isn't about choosing one side over the other or just forgetting the bad stuff. It's about building an inner house with two distinct rooms. The first room you build to honor everything good and generous and loving your father gave you. But then you build a second room, a separate one, to house his shadow, his wounds, his destructive side. The goal is to hold the full complex truth of who he was without denying anything and without remaining a victim. And that's what it all comes down to. We can't just demand a visit from the king or try to force our way into his presence. Real maturity comes from doing the hard psychological work of building that inner house. That's what creates the space, the readiness for that kingly principle to finally arrive and actually live within us. And that's the question this whole exploration leaves us with, isn't it? In a culture where all the outer symbols of masculine order have pretty much vanished, the journey to find that inner source of purpose, of blessing, of passion, it's more essential. And it's definitely more personal than it has ever been. So, how do you find your own?